Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our June 3rd, Tuesday at 3 webcast series event, Protect with Tech. I'm Alan Falcon. I'm the CEO of Cumulus Global. I want to thank you for taking your time out of a busy day and week to join us here to hopefully gain some knowledge and share some insights. I want to welcome everyone, whether you're here live or whether you're attending and listening to this recording on demand. For those of you live, you'll probably notice that all of the audio is muted. That's to avoid any unnecessary background noise. So at any time, if you have a question or a comment, along the top right-hand side of your screen, our webinar system here has icons. One of them opens the questions window. That's the best way to ask a question. It lets me track to make sure we get them all answered before we depart here this afternoon. As I mentioned, you might be watching this on demand, so the session is being recorded. We generally get it posted up on the website within 24 hours. We'll send you a link. Feel free to share it with those who you think might find the information useful. We have other events and resources on our website as well. Additionally to this webcast, we have other webcasts on demand, including some of our Coffee and Clouds series, specifically focused on some of the issues businesses are facing with respect to work from home and getting more teamwork out of the G Suite and Office 365 environments. Those webcasts are shorter than the typical hour, 45 minutes to an hour we take here. Those recordings run between 15 and 20 minutes and are very concise and to the point. So check those out. If you view one of those recordings, we'll send you either a Starbucks or a Dunkin' gift card. So the coffee will be on us. We also have on our homepage an index of COVID-19 blog posts and resources, both at the business level related to some of the financial, tax, and other issues, as well as technology resources. And this week we'll be updating. We've got a number of great partners with some upcoming events. We'll be adding those to our event calendar as well. We've had business journals, law firms, accounting firms. We've been sharing their events because they're providing useful information on some of the financial tax, human resources, and legal issues surrounding the COVID-19 crisis and all of the relief packages and mitigation efforts underway. So we're trying to be a one-stop shop to help you get the information you need to manage this crisis and how we come out of it, your business, not just your technology. At any time, contact us, info@cumulusglobal.com. I see those messages. Either myself or a member of my team will get back to you quickly to answer your questions. So what's up for discussion here today? Really, when we talk about protecting with tech, we're really sort of updating our view and our philosophy and our solutions around cyber threat protection and protecting your business, which means protecting your data, your applications, your systems, and your people. And really what we want to talk about today is sort of the increase in cyber attacks, how we do prevention and response, as well as some new issues around compliance, legal and industry regulations, your company policies, even some HR and labor compliance issues. And finally, with companies having many more people working remotely who used to not work remotely or working from home, there's been a lot of discussion in the marketplace about staff management, monitoring, oversights. We'll offer our view on that as well. So let's start with cyber attacks, and we'll really talk about prevention, response, and recovery here. There are some increased risks, and as always, we view this as a strategic issue for most businesses, and we'll talk about some tactics and some of the tech needed to solve this problem. And so when we talk about the cyber attacks and what's happening now with COVID-19, we're seeing a couple of things. One, we're seeing a heightened number of attacks, specifically leveraging or trying to take advantage of communications that are happening related to COVID-19. So we've got a lot of phishing attacks where they're pretending to be banks or government agencies or business associations, hopefully trying to get you or your employees to compromise their identities and get access. On top of that, work from home and some of the changing tech involved in having people working on-site, off-site, or some combination in between really does change your security and your risk profile. And that's across the entire spectrum of vectors that we normally look at. So it changes the security and risk for not only your identity and your physical endpoint devices, most notably now that many companies now have people working from home, they might be using personal computers as opposed to company-owned devices for the first time. Your user data is going to be traversing public internet. It's going to be on those local machines in people's homes or in remote offices. You might be adding cloud apps or integrating additional cloud apps into your environment, and you still have your physical infrastructure back at the office if you're maintaining that office as well. So when we talk about cyber threats, our model is always CPR, which starts with communicate and educate, uh, protect and prevent, and respond and recover. And so when we talk about communicate and education, really in this time with COVID-19, it's important that people understand, and your employees understand the expansion of the threat, right? It's not just the typical, hey, you might get a phishing email or beware of suspicious web pages or communications that are probing you for information like passwords or other identifying information that might come in over the phone. It's really understanding that personal devices pose a new threat to the company. Why? Because as a company, you have no control over the level of spam or virus protection on that device. Most home computers come with some free trial that many people subscribe to, however, some don't, of a consumer-grade antivirus. And while those are good basic protections, they don't provide the sophisticated protections against advanced threats, the types of threats that cyber criminals use to attack businesses. Additionally, you come in the issue of crossing paths. Those home computers or even business computers that have been taken home are sometimes used by other family members who might not be aware that their behavior is posing a security risk. And anytime you've got someone's personal data in applications on the same system as your business applications and data, you have to worry about those paths crossing. And so additional education and communication with your employees about safe behaviors, particularly the concept of church and state, keep the business communications, data, applications separate from the personal data, communications, and applications, and you'll be fine. But with that, and with those computers out there on potentially insecure home networks, running on potentially insecure machines, you need to think about expanding your security envelope. And in addition to doing that and talking to your employees about the need to do that, part of what you're looking at is some new policies and procedures. And we'll get into that in the next step as we talk about prevent and protect. But you're going to need them to sign on to policies and know that if you're adding security software to the machines, you'll pay for it. And if they leave employment, you'll probably want that license removed. Now, with the additional education and additional awareness, it's never a good time to stop testing employees and feedback. I don't mean testing them every day, but the periodic controlled message that's a phishing email to see who clicks and might need additional training or guidance is always an important part of any security, preparedness, communication, and education program. So we get to the P, that's prevent and protect. Very important here across a wide range of spectrum. So when we talk about preventing and protecting, we're really talking about stopping the attack and protecting your environment from those attacks. And so looking across those 5 threat vectors I spoke about earlier, when we talk about protecting identities, the best way to protect identities right now is to have some form of sophisticated multi-factor authentication. I know it's a pain for users. It can be an inconvenience to have their phone handy to receive a text code or use an authenticator app or to open an email inbox to verify. But having that, knowing that whoever's going into the account doesn't just have the username and password, but has a physical device and is physically connected in a way that makes it more secure is there. Single sign-on is important, and an emerging area, particularly for small businesses, is mobile device management. And mobile device management helps protect identities because it ties your employee's identity to the devices they're using and tracks the applications, data, and other services on that device that they're using for work versus personal, and helps with that segregation of their personal from their work identity. For endpoint protection, as I mentioned earlier, basic protection isn't enough anymore. You need the next-gen protections with the artificial intelligence built in, the heuristics, the cloud connection for a broader database of risks, and ideally have solutions that if they detect inappropriate behavior by a file or a process, that they have some ability to reverse and back out of those changes before an infection spreads. When we talk about user data and applications, the issues are same. It's who has access to what permissions do they have to those files or to components or data within your applications, and are you encrypting your data in transit at rest, whether it's files, emails, or other things as necessary. And finally, you still need infrastructure protection that's physical and logical, which means if you've got people working from home, it's in your interest to help them make sure that their wireless router, that their cable modem, however they're connecting to the internet, is just as secure physically and logically as your corporate network. You're not only benefiting your customers, you're benefiting your employee and their family as well, but really it's about making sure that as people, as data, applications in your business are fully covered and protected from those types of risks. And finally, for the R piece, it's really respond and recover. And there's two components to that. One is the business level response and the technical level response. And we always, most people focus on the technical level response, right? Can I, restore my data from a backup or recover my servers from an image or get my data back into the cloud? How quickly can I return to operations, remediate the problem and isolate the damage in the problem itself? And that's very important, but there's also a business level response. It's currently estimated right now that 2/3 of cryptoware attacks where people's data is being, is being encrypted and held for ransom for those ransomware attacks, that roughly 2/3 of them, before the ransomware hits and before the data is encrypted, it's stolen, and you've got a data breach. And so when you have a cyber attack, it's in your best interest to assume that a data breach is involved, even if you're initially not sure. And at the business level, more than the technical response to how do I isolate the problem, stop it, remediate it, and get back to running quickly, the business level now, because of regulations, both at the state and federal level, and even industry best practices and standards now, there's a business level response. So first, you need forensics, the ability to go in, understand what the breach, if there was a breach, what the attack was, what the impact was, what data might have been compromised. Next, you're going to need legal advice. Why? Because in most states right now, there's a reporting requirement if you suspect a breach or if you've confirmed a breach, and you want to make sure you're compliant there. It minimizes your financial liability, and in some states, even criminal liability. You probably need some public relations, whether if word of the breach gets out, it can damage your reputation. You want to be on top of that. Public relations is also how you communicate what's happened to your customers. And knowing that we serve, our customers are a mix of companies that serve other businesses as well as might serve families and students, as educational institutions, or might serve more traditional consumers, you have that end user interaction as well, or that end customer interaction as well. And if you are working with consumers, you may need to establish a call center to monitor, track, and manage inbound questions from your customers. And you might want to or need to offer them credit monitoring service. And all of that comes in, and that's going to come at a cost. And we can talk about solutions for that as we get on. So when we talk about how things have changed, it's really with the increased risk profile, you need to be more prepared to prevent and protect. And that really means extending that security envelope, extending those services, even if it means to personal computers, expanding your employee training and the guidance you provide, and then backing it up with the ability, should something get through, that you can get back up and running and you can protect your business financially and legally. As I mentioned at the top of the webcast, the current work environment and the impact of COVID-19 is creating a number of compliance issues. And these come out of the increased risks we've talked about, increased demands for compliance, and some new considerations as well. And we're going to look at compliance from 3 different viewpoints this afternoon. One is very typical, right? It's legal. It involves legal, laws, legal regulations, governmental regulations, as well as industry regulations. And what's the difference there? So the Healthcare Information Privacy and Portability Act, HIPAA, is a governmental regulation, right? It's mandated by the federal government on making personal health information private and secure, and controlling how it's shared and transmitted. PCI, or personal card information, is actually not a governmental regulation. It's an industry standard regulation. And basically, it's the consortium of banks and companies that allow you to process credit cards have come up with an auditable regulation set that you need to comply with in order to use those services, in order to be secure. And basically, if you comply with PCI and there's fraud, you're effectively covered. If you don't comply with PCI and the fraud, then you're you're at fault and you're liable for that loss. You're not going to be able to recover your losses. And so they're, subtle difference, but different, different origination, different enforcement mechanisms. I also want to talk about company policies because, as we've talked about in the past, if you've got people working remotely or working from home for the first time, they may not be familiar with your policies and procedures with respect to remote work, or even you may not have robust policies for the use of personal computer equipment or personal networks, and you want those in place. And there are other factors that come into your company policies as your teams are no longer on site. They might be remote or they might be a hybrid mix. And finally, there's some human resources and labor things I'll talk about. They might seem a little nitpicky, but they're things that could catch you if you're not careful. And I certainly want to make sure that you're aware of them so at least you can determine if there's any investment necessary to protect yourself from these HR or labor related issues. So again, I bring up the increased risk slide because it's the same impact here, right? We're not all working in the office. Who's working remote, how they're working remote, the resources they're using to work remote or work from home is different. How teams are communicating and collaborating within your company are probably different. In some ways, hopefully a little bit more robust. And all of that has an impact when it comes to compliance. And so with those risks, we also now have increased demands. And some of these were happening anyways, even pre-COVID-19, right? So I believe at this point, everyone should be familiar with the General Data Protection Regulation out of the EU or Gdpr. This applies if you do any business with any legal entity or human being in the European Union. It sets standards for data protection and privacy, even the ability to quote unquote be erased out of your digital record. And you need mechanisms in place not only from a technology standpoint, but from a process standpoint. You have to have a published process for receiving and resolving complaints or concerns. Within the U.S. right now, Massachusetts for a long time has had, in the Code of Massachusetts regulations, pretty strict requirements for personally identifiable information and how that's handled and managed. New York State has passed more stringent regulations, but the benchmark in the U.S. right now is Ccpa, known as the California Consumer Protection Act, which has a wide-ranging set of requirements, again, on data privacy, data protection, security, what you can share with whom and when, and what your responsibilities are if you believe that there's been any sort of compromise or breach, or even how you respond to individual requests for identification of what information you're holding and how you're using it, and whether or not they want to allow you to maintain or share that information. And all of these come into play, and now you have the addition of case law, whereas we've seen some pretty large breaches from some majorly somewhat trusted corporations. The number of individual and class action lawsuits is on the rise. Additionally, we're seeing case law from criminal and civil cases being brought by attorneys general, particularly with respect to state or federal regulations. So we're now seeing, the offices of Medicaid and Medicare doing audits and initiating civil action against companies that aren't HIPAA compliant. We see attorneys general filing civil suits and complaints against businesses that aren't following state codes. We see U.S. attorneys doing the same thing on the federal level. And so there's a growing collection of case law that's defining the level of care and standard and your liability above and beyond, the letter and in some opinions, the intent of the laws that we have. So we mix this increased demands with some new policies and procedures around health and safety, right? We've got new rules about social distancing, about workspace, about how we communicate that's going to move and change the way we work together and communicate, that it's going to change how we're using the tools or even the type of information that we might be sharing online. And so we've spoken to companies who said, they never really thought about email encryption because all of their customer meetings were face-to-face, and they would hand the customer a packet with the information in it. It was always transmitted in a beautiful brochure or binder on paper with the customer as part of, sort of their selling and their marketing and their customer relationship management, and that face-to-face, very tangible communications. Well, now that things are online, they're generating an electronic version of that binder and emailing it to the customer, not realizing that, wait a minute, that has sensitive personal financial information, and we can't just do that. So you have new policies and procedures, whether it's health and safety, whether it's how you're interacting with your customers. And of course, we recommend that you have BYOD, personal device and work from home policies and procedures. And know that this goes beyond technical. I'm going to sort of step aside for a second. That when remote work first started to be discussed in the late 90s and mid 2000s, there were rulings at the federal level that if an employee is working from a remote location or at home on a regular basis, and that's authorized by the company and it's part of a company program or decision, then the company is still responsible for the health and well-being of the employee in their workspace, even if it's in their own home. So in other words, you know that most of us who have to buy the office furniture know that if you buy a desk chair with a single post underneath, that you need 5 wheels and not 4, so that if someone leans back, they don't tip over. Well, if you have an employee at home on a 4-wheeled chair, on a 4-wheeled post support chair, and they lean back and fall, you're liable. So the same rules about providing that environment for a safe and healthy environment in the office applies for the people's home office if you're having them or you're allowing them as a matter of program or policy to work from home. And so similarly, your policies about devices and bring your own should be protecting not only the employee, but you, the company. And we've talked, I don't want to belabor the point anymore. I think we've covered it enough. Here's an interesting one that sort of has caught a couple of companies off guard. And what's interesting is it's been hard for me to assess the risk when it comes to HR and labor. And the first one is the issue of non-exempt work time. So if you have employees who you pay hourly, and historically they come to the office at 8:30, they work, they take their lunch break, maybe it's paid or unpaid depending on your business rules. They finish up at a certain time, they put in 8 worked hours for the day, they do 40 hours for a week. You understand as an employee that if they go over those 40 hours, you owe them time and a half for overtime. When people are working remotely, things tend to change. One, because of the realities of people working from home, potentially having spouses or partners working from home, or kids or pets that are running, creating distraction or interference or require attention, you might have people now who are working a number of hours in the morning, a number of hours in the afternoon, and maybe even an hour or 2 in the evening. Additionally, you might find that even if you've got hourly employees working, 8 hours during their normal hours from home, that if you send someone an email at 9:30 at night and they respond, okay, well, on the one hand, that's a good thing. On the other hand, if they're paid hourly, when they get on at 9:30 to answer an email or a text you sent, that's time that they're supposed to be paid for. And so in a couple of sense, in trying to assess what's the risk and how much do you need to invest to protect yourself with tech here, I've seen 2 different things. One, I've certainly seen situations where a disgruntled employee, who's putting in hours that they're not getting paid for, in answering demands from supervisors or managers or bosses or coworkers, files a complaint for wage theft or back wages. I've also seen and heard of a couple of spot audits where attorney generals are looking and checking to see that wage laws are being followed. And it's hard to know the scope of those spot checks, but definitely the disgruntled employee or employees who feel that since you've had them working from home, they're putting in 20-25% more time or 10% more time, whatever it might be, and not getting fairly compensated for it, can create financial liability or legal liability for you. As important, creeping hours, unpaid hours for non-exempt employees, for hourly employees, can also create resentment and hurt morale and hurt motivation. So there's the business efficiency and the human factor side of things, as well as the legal side of things. Additionally, work from home now, particularly if your company uses 1099 contractors, can raise some interesting complications as well. Because in general, 1099 contractors are supposed to be using their own tools and operating under their own direction. If historically they've worked on premise for you and now they're working from home, if you're providing or requiring them to operate in a certain environment with certain security parameters, or you're using certain tools, depending on your state and how the rules are interpreted, you might actually be required to treat them as a W-2 employee versus a pure contractor, or maybe required to do, in Massachusetts, for example, sometimes employers are required to handle folks like that on a hybrid, where they're still 1099 with respect to pay and payroll taxes, but the company ends up having to pay workers' comp and unemployment insurance for them. And so you want to make sure that if you're using contractors who are on 1099, if you're shifting the way they work and how they work, and that's impacting the tools that they're using or that you need them to use, you want to make sure that's done in a way that you're not inadvertently creating a conflict between contractor laws and labor laws versus having them as a W-2 on payroll employee. So with these extended demands and compliance, our advice is to think about the technology and tools you have in place for compliance and extend those to meet the increased demand and the increased risks. And so we start off by saying, we believe that everyone should at this point have some form of mobile device management, not just on your smartphones and tablets. Good mobile device management solutions will cover your laptops and your desktops as well. So you have a single security envelope that protects the human and what they're doing, regardless of the device that they're working on. And it'll manage, particularly if you're adding that to an employee's personal device, or employees are taking devices home and they may be using it for personal things. You want to separate that company in personal data and information applications. Similarly goes for encryption. Not every business needs to encrypt emails, but certainly all of your data on your systems or in your cloud should be encrypted both at rest and in motion. And if you have a need for encryption for industry or legal regulatory reasons, know that that encryption requirement is probably not just emails going back and forth, but files, data, and even your chat messages. Archive and e-discovery might need to be updated, and your coverage might need to be updated to meet requirements, particularly if you've got people working remotely who might be storing files temporarily or semi-permanently on local devices or other resources. And I'll jump to the other side. This is another reason to hunt out and eliminate shadow IT. It increases the risk that data is being kept in places that aren't compliant, that you don't have that archive and discovery, that aren't encrypted or properly protected. If you are aware, and creates liability, particularly we are all aware that we're commercially responsible to protect that data. So if we're aware that we have shadow IT and don't take steps to prevent its use and don't enforce those policies, it could be claimed that we are grossly negligent, which would create a legal and a financial responsibility, or a larger legal and a larger financial responsibility should there be a breach or an incident or some other breach of trust. And so you want to make sure that you extend your efforts to eliminating shadow IT even more so than before. Identity management, if people are using personal devices, you're going to need the policy and the trade-offs that you have to offer to be able to incorporate those personal devices. You really don't want an unsecure personal device connecting to your network. What you don't want is an employee's 11-year-old kid playing around on their home computer to delete a project for a customer. And we've seen that happen. And so you need to update your policies and procedures. So appropriate use policies, use of personal device policies, policies around communications and security, behavior identity management, account protection, use of authorized versus unauthorized IT, all of those come into play, should be reviewed and refreshed as necessary. And then as you implement those policies, you want to make sure that your access controls and your permission controls match those. So review and updates in order, and look at new methods of access. Remember that you might have people working remotely for the first time. And you might, because some of those people are hourly, you might want time and location control. So you might want to restrict people to be able to work from either in the office or at their home, but no place else. And you can do that by IP address. You might want to restrict certain employees to only work within certain hours so they don't inadvertently generate overtime that you need to track or create that liability. You might have people who are VPNing in or doing a remote desktop PC to PC session or some other form of remote access to get access to data, you want to make sure that they're doing that securely and that the expediency of getting people set up and working remotely from home didn't create any security holes that are lingering. And finally, tools for 1099. You want to structure those in a way that your contractors are accessing your systems or participating in your business activity in a way that provides the security, but without changing their status from a contractor to an employee or a presumed employee. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about human factors, in particularly as they relate to hybrid and remote teams. There's a lot of discussion on LinkedIn groups and other business forums and CEO roundtables about how do you manage, how do you provide oversight, and how do you monitor remote employees. And really, there's definitely technology there, right? And there are a lot of companies now that have come out, they've become very popular. You install it on your employee systems, it tracks their keystrokes, what they're doing, how much time they spend in different applications. You might even log websites they visit. It'll generate reports, it'll try and assess who's working and who's not working and who's goofing off. So when we talk about it, however, the technology's there and you can certainly use it. And many of you might find it's worth the money to do that. I guess my advice here is be careful what you wish for. Let me take it, from a different perspective, right? First and foremost, if you have policies and procedures in place and your employees understand those, then certainly you're within your right to monitor and manage to those policies. But you also have to have some level of trust that your employees are going to follow those. And so putting the policies in place is one thing. Draconian oversight, management, and monitoring is another. So compliance with those policies and managing productivity remotely and managing teams really comes down to communications and having effective leadership styles, right? So knowing that you're not in the same office, you might not be able to walk around and say hi to folks. Managers and supervisors, team members need to make a conscious effort to check in and talk to people, whether it's by phone, instant, text chat or video chat. At some point, team meetings, one-on-one contact needs to become part of your daily routine. Even if it's not a formal meeting with an agenda, those informal check-ins can still happen. Having those informal check-ins actually gives you a really good sense of what people are working on, where they're at. You can ask those questions, you can get a sense. We suggest leveraging video conferencing or video chat for that, because it gives you the facial expression at least, and you can look for signs of stress or duress or angst or anxiety, or see that people are actually comfortable and relaxed and functioning well. You can also get a sense of, do they look tired? Do they look energized? All of those non-verbal visual cues that help communicate whether or not you can assess how productive and how effective people are being. And that for many people, that kind of explicit, almost scheduled check-in is going to be a change in leadership style and management style, but it's absolutely essential for providing some of that management and oversight. So then we get to the monitoring part, right? And certainly there are embedded and third-party tools. So for example, G Suite has reports that will let administrators know how many users are active using different components of the system, generally what their levels of activity are. You can check individual users for last login and some simple statistics, but it's very much a summary level. Microsoft 365 and the Office 365 products, most of them have a tool called Delve, which looks at your activity and tracks it. It's really designed to be a personal productivity tool. Some of the information is available to administrators to look and oversee level of productivity and utilization of the tools and services. There's an advanced level that companies can pay for that gets a lot more detailed reporting. And finally, there are definitely third-party products out there that will do everything from log application and file utilization to screen, to keystroke counts and captures. And I guess when it comes to monitoring, a word of caution is here. I had a friend who with some family members has a financial advisory business. And the question he had is, they've got a mix of employees. Some have been with them longer than others. And he said, for our newer employees who've only been with us, a year or 2 or 3 years, everyone's working from home. How can I be sure that they're actually putting in the time and they're getting the work done? And my comment to him was, one, you should be able to see the results. Do they have metrics and expectations that are measurable? Or are there metrics and measurements that maybe aren't as tangible, maybe they're more qualitative than quantitative, but that you can gather from periodic conversations and check-in meetings with them? And he said, yeah, of course there are. Okay, so there's your benchmark, right? And yes, it's not automated and it requires human interaction, but it's more natural. And the second question I asked him, or it was actually a set of questions, was one, if you have an employee working from home and you're not trusting that they're going to put in a full day's work, or even if they get interrupted during the day, reassess their schedule to get the work done and put in that full effort, then why do you even have them as an employee? If you can't trust your employees to do the job, why would you hire them and keep them on? Similarly, when you talk about putting in monitoring tools, in most states, you need to notify employees that you're monitoring and what you're monitoring. So if you go ahead and you put in those tools, and it's not seen as a way to assess general efficiency and the effectiveness of the tools you're using, if it's seen as a way of watching them, then the message you're saying to your employees is, we don't necessarily trust you. And when you think about your best employees, okay, if your message to your best employee is, you're one of our best employees, but we don't really fully trust you, then why would they want to stay and work for you? Particularly as other businesses start to open up and companies will be looking for the best talents. So when thinking about monitoring and the level that you're going to do, whether it's summary tools that are embedded or a third-party tool in more detail, really think about your trust relationship and how you interact culturally, from a management perspective, from a leadership style with your employees, and how you want your managers and your team leads and your supervisors and your support staff to do the same. And how much, and how important it is to you that your employees trust you and trust the company and trust their managers and their leadership as well. And what happens to your business and the quality that you can deliver to your customer if that trust relationship is broken. Okay, and then decide how much monitoring you really want to do or is really necessary. And the last part about monitoring is make sure you absolutely positively understand the legal ramifications. As I said, some states it's allowed because it's a workplace. Others have single party consent. Others still have dual party consent. Talk to your human resource specialist or outside advisor. Talk to your legal counsel before you make any changes in how you put any form of electronic surveillance on the work your employees do. Also know that if you work on certain types of government contracts, any form of employee surveillance or timekeeping of work on a task level might be illegal and a violation of the terms and conditions of your contract. So I've covered a lot of ground. Where does that leave us? We're still in COVID-19 crisis, even though things are opening up more in some places than others. So when we think about our aviate, navigate, and communicate model that we pulled from air travel and from airline pilots and private pilots, in between those phases, we still have assess, act, and manage. So given the information today and Protect with Tech, knowing that the landscape's changing, the external threats, the internal risks are different, the way your people are working are different, which requires modification of how you look at security and how you're going to protect your business, your people, your data, your customers. First step is always to assess what are your desired business outcomes, what are the results you're trying to achieve, near term as we emerge from this phase of the COVID-19 crisis, and long term. What changes and impacts have happened within your business or externally to your business, and how has that affected your needs and priorities? With that in mind, it's time to act. Let's look at your protection profile, your security envelope, if you will. Understand the strategic direction you need to be and want to be going in, and then define the specific tactics and solutions, the individual products and services that you need to fill that in. And again, it might not need to be a right away all at once. It can be incremental. It can be adaptive as your business continues to adapt and change to the current business climate and your operations continue to modify. And as you plan that out and act, define the value proposition. Don't just look at the cost of doing. What's the cost of not doing and the cost of risk that you might be allowing to happen or might increase by not action. And so look at that, someone once referred to it as the negative opportunity cost, right? The cost of doing nothing versus the cost of doing something, and decide where the value propositions are and where you want to invest money to get that value in return. And finally, you got to manage it. You can't just throw technology out there. Communication, prepping your team. There's change management. You want those projects to be smoothly, and you want it to integrate into your future and ongoing operations. And so in general, as companies are adapting to the new world order, the current and the emerging exit of COVID-19 lockdowns, the potential of a second wave in the fall and preparing for that, realization that many more people can work remotely or work from home than we previously thought, we're offering two services. The first one is an in-depth analysis to help you with a recovery roadmap, and it's a full assessment. We start out with a short introductory and kickoff meeting. You're going to complete a questionnaire. It's not, a simple little marketing gimmicky thing that takes you 5-10 minutes. This will take you 45 to 75 minutes to complete. We'll take that information, we'll analyze it, we'll come back with recommendations, we'll have a meeting with you to review our analysis, our recommendations, and we'll map out what we believe is a prioritized list of steps you should take to support how you want your business to look now, as we're still in the midst of COVID-19 and trying to recover, as well as post-COVID-19 longer-term recovery and longer-term operations. That's normally a paid engagement. We have some opportunities for discounts and free service there. If you're interested in something you're interested in, contact me, let me know. We'll be happy to discuss it. We also offer a much less formal view that we can focus on specific areas of concern. So if you're not looking for the full roadmap, but you want a quick sanity check on your security and privacy mechanisms, excellent. We offer a COVID-19 response and recovery assessment. This will be most likely a video meeting. You can request the assessment from our homepage. It is free. We're going to ask you a fewer number of questions. It's all discussion oriented. It's very informal. It's about a 30-minute call, but we can take a topic, focus on it, help understand where you're at, make recommendations and suggestions. One of the things we can offer people, beyond selling you things and to help you out, is our time and expertise. Both of these assessments are intended to do just that. So if you've got concerns or you just want a sanity check, let us know. We can pick which scope is right for you, and we can execute those assessments and help provide peace of mind as well as direction and guidance going forward. So that's, I've covered a lot of ground in the last 45 minutes. I appreciate you hanging with me. At this point, if you haven't yet done so and you have a question, open up that questions window and ask away. At any point in time, feel free to contact Cumulus Global, info@cumulusglobal.com. Our toll-free and standard phone numbers are on the screen as well. Additionally, you can reach out to me. That's a direct line to my desk. I do not have an administrative assistant. You're going to get me or my voicemail. I will tell you my email address is up there. I am much better at answering emails and responding to email inquiries than I am remembering to check and respond to voicemail. The best way to reach me is by email. Feel free to send one along. And on that note, I'm going to halt the recording portion of the webcast. I'll stay on the line for Q&A. So for the folks who are watching this as a recording, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy day and week to check it out on demand. Please contact us or contact me with any questions or concerns. And have a great day.